It's time for the beer radio you've been looking for. This is the show that dispels myths, tackles the toughest topics, and makes no apologies for geeking out on beer. Hosted by two guys that drink before they think. Jamil Zainasheff and John Palmer. This is Brew Strong.
Hey, howdy, hey, my brewing brothers and sisters.
What's up, y'all?
Greetings.
What's up, y'all? It's pretty good.
Not John, but try.
Well, you're gonna have to work coming up with a good one. It's much harder than you think. That's why I'm stuck with the hey, howdy, hey, which people wonder about that, I think. But there's like a Disney song. I explained this a long time ago. My younger daughter, she loved the Disney music from the park and all that stuff, and there was like a song, and it has "Hey Howdy Hey" in it, and we were driving back from a road trip out. I don't know where we were going, but we were listening to that. I'm like, and I told her I would use it on the show, and she was so excited that I've used it ever since because I love my daughters so much. So it was kind of cool to be able to do that for her. Only that.
Considering how long ago that had to be for either one of your daughters to get excited over that, that's impressive.
Yeah, we've been doing the show a long time. I don't know. It's got to be like 1,000 hours or something by now. Somebody go and calculate how many hours we've been doing the show.
Next homework assignment, 100 points.
I was going to say, Dad, John took forever to settle on greetings. It was
right.
Hello, everybody.
Right. I'm just like, yeah, John, you can't do hello, everybody.
Wait. Yeah. Well, Michael did it so perfect. He should do that because it sounded like
right.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody. And there you go. That's not a bad idea.
How's everybody doing today?
Well, I'm always thinking about how my good friend John Blickman's doing. He's out there in the wilds of the Indiana and working on the next great thing. One of the great things that they've been working on is doing commercial scale equipment. And they've been doing it for quite a while now, a number of years. And one of the cool things he's done is when you're doing, a nano brewery or a microbrewery, you need to conserve space. You don't want to pay for some huge building where you have to sell a ton of beer to just stay open. That happens all the time. You want to be conservative on space, and one of the things that is actually a really good idea is a tall, skinny 3.5 barrel fermenter. So if you're doing 3 barrel batches, the taller and skinnier it is, the more you can jam into a given footprint, because you're paying by the square inch on the floor, not the cubic inch when you sign a lease, right? So they have a 3.5 barrel, which they call the tall boy. It easily will fit through a 36-inch door. All the ports, fittings, everything is on the front of the tank, so you can tuck that into a corner or tie it up against the wall. I was just helping somebody set a 30 barrel fermenter. They're trying to get 4 in this one area, and it's really tight, and there's walls all around that can't be moved. And so we're just jockeying that for about an hour to get every last inch that we could. But a fermenter like this, nice, that it's tall, skinny, you'll do really well with something like that. And I'm sure everything else about this, I haven't personally used it, but knowing Blickman, it's going to be a great piece of kit. So check it out. You can find it at Blickman Engineering in the Pro Brewing section at blickmanengineering.com. And if you appreciate that John Blickman for the last 15, 16 years has been paying for this show, so you don't have to, please send him a email, feedback@blickmanengineering.com. Tell him, thank you, John, for sponsoring the show. And there you go. Check him out. And if you're at the homebrew conference this year, San Diego, I bet you Blickman Engineering will be there, and you can say hi to John Blickman yourself. Very, very smart guy, but very funny guy, very humorous, great sense of humor, very professional. But, once you get to know him, he is one funny dude. All right.
Then he wouldn't be upset if somebody were to buy, say, 10 3.5s instead of that 30 barrel, just to help them save space on their rent, because you might pay today, but you're saving money in the long term.
Well, I'm guessing that 10 3.5s takes up more room than 130. Just, nature of volumes and stuff.
Stackable. Stackable. Let's contact John. Tell him stackable.
If you're starting your urban brewery where apartments or spaces at a premium, and you don't want to buy a large space, but you need to be able to brew some big batches. There you go.
There you go. I'm with you. So to answer your questions, these questions come in from either you, posting your questions live in the chat, or sending your questions in via email to brewstrong@thebrewingnetwork.com. You send them in, we'll get to them, pretty much by the next show. Not a problem. We've got some backlog that I'm working through those too, but we will get to them pretty quick for you. And we do appreciate your questions. So send them in. We do really appreciate it. Here's a quick one. Question regarding brewing with style. Hey, Jamil and John, I am a relatively new brewer and have a simple question regarding the recipes in brewing classic styles. If a recipe, for example, Munich Helles on page 52, has steeping grains in the extract recipe, do you still include those in the all-grain version? For example, the all-grain version of the Munich Helles has the following, or should the melanoidin malt be left out? It would be the Continental Pilsner, Munich malt, and the melanoidin malt. Love the shows, both your books. You've taught me so much. Kind regards, Chris. He is at Australia. You guys know the answer to this, right?
Yes.
First off, g'day, mate. I hope I didn't butcher that too much. But yeah, it's everything plus the pull out the DME, LME, add your base grain.
Yeah, the base grain just swaps out for the DME, LME, and everything else remains the same. Hops, specialty grains, all that stuff.
Your little paragraph at the end tells you exactly what to do and nothing more, nothing less. If you're brewing all grain, swap the this for the that. Don't change anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it was changed to anything else, it would be in that paragraph. But there you go.
Otherwise, you would have forgotten to do that about 180 times.
Yes.
And I could just throw in, use the recipe the way it's written because they're all winners. And I've actually won with a couple of them.
There you go.
Yeah, same.
There you go.
All right, let's do this. We'll take a short break. We'll come back. We'll have some of your questions live from the chat when we come back right after this.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Back to the two guys that know how to turn beer into beer. This is Brew Strong.
All right, we're back. Thanks all for tuning in, especially you guys who are tuning in live. And it looks like, do you have a question from Travis?
We have a question from Richard George Vargas. I'm assuming he goes by all three.
You mean RGV?
Yeah, you got RGV, sure.
The notorious RGV.
So as I look at the question and I see the video on Facebook and it's 30 seconds behind, and I look over and your lips aren't moving. It kind of freaks me out. But anyway.
Yeah, I have to mask that off because sometimes when I like get distracted, I'm like, it's because I see things moving.
Right. I keep mine the same way. I've kind of shrunk the Zoom screen to see us and the questions on the side, but I switched back because then Edward threw something in on top of it that I had to scroll back up for Richard's. So Richard says the general consensus is leave hops in dry hop too long leads to hop burn / grassy flavor. I'm gonna pause right there, and I'll just say there is a difference as you leave your hops in for X amount of time. So let's move on to what RGV says. His experience has been in an effort to avoid oxygen. He likes to dry hop all his beers at high Kreuzen, and he's had little to no hop burn or grassy flavors. Thoughts?
Well, I would say that if the results you're getting are what you want, then absolutely just keep doing it. I don't like adding hops to fermentation because they stay in the beer too long and they become kind of harsh. And I've experienced a very harshness with that. We actually did tests at Heretic for fermentation dry hopping and post-fermentation dry hopping. And in blind tasting panels, every last person, 100%, picked the one that was dry hopped post-fermentation.
You just broke every brew philosophy ever because they've never had that occurrence. Sorry, anyway.
Right, they always have. But it depends on the people you're, if you just pick random people that, it tastes like beer. Yeah, it's like, yeah, all right. You may get random results. But there's a value to that too. I'm not poo-pooing brewlosophy because ideally everybody should be able to, you should get a statistically significant result from just any person, beer drinker or not, detecting one thing or another, right? So, but it was always, the preference was for post fermentation, and it's again a matter of time. You were saying, Travis, there is a difference between how long you leave it in or not.
But Michael, I have a bit of a cleanup if Michael doesn't cover it, or Michael's
well. So for me as a hop guy in terms of dry hopping, and I actually asked you that same question at the Brew Strong Live at Brew Chatter, and but for me, I always do the after fermentation, and I just think when you do it at high Kreuzen, you get a lot of CO2 scrubbing. And, if there's certain flavors in there that are not so water soluble, they're going to get pulled out by blown off. And so I always try to do for those kind of compounds I'm trying to get in the beer, I shoot for the whirlpool. So that way, actually, I'll leave the vegetal matter in the kettle, vegetal matter.
Yep.
Changes are nice. But, and then that way I'm basically, putting these materials in for the whole time. And then when I dry hop on the homebrew level, I always think as long as you're quick, and I got a buddy who brews in buckets, and he's made gold medal hazies where he opens the lid, throws in his thing and closes it quick. And as long as you're quick, CO2 is heavy, and that's the theory is that, or not the theory, but it works out that there's a blanket that.
Well, and that's another excellent point, because you don't have to worry really about oxygen during fermentation. Everybody, the old traditional homebrew folks are like, no oxygen once it starts to ferment. BS. You throw it in, it's fine. There's enough yeast in there, even at the end of fermentation. There's still so much yeast in suspension that it'll suck up any oxygen that you've added, the minor amount of oxygen you add, thrown in the dry hops. So yeah, a couple of good points. Yep. What'd you have, Travis?
Yeah, the cleanup is the time your hops spend in your beer affects the flavor you get from those hops. As Mike and Jamil both pointed out, you don't need to put it in on day 2. you still have active fermentation on day 3, day 4, that's fine. And towards the end, I do my dry hop one day before I think my beer is quote unquote done. And then 2 days later as it's cleaning up. And I also have medal winning hazies, lots of medal winning DIPAs and stuff. People like my beer for the most part. Maybe they say they like it just while go away, doesn't matter. I don't think you need to hop it that early, but if you like the beer, that's number one. You know, that is, if you like the beer, that's number one. But if like,
no reason to change it if you love it.
Right. If my El Dorado doesn't taste like El Dorado is supposed to taste, and someone else is doing something different with their El Dorado, lots of levers you can
right. Well, and it's good to try other things and, you know, to taste them. And it could be better, you know, to do it a different way. And then if it is, absolutely, you know, make the change. If not, then don't. All right. And then you've got another one in the chat. What did you say?
Yes. Edward Kent has asked, what is the best way to purge kegs of O2? We charge with CO2 to 15 PSI 3 times and blow off. Would it be better to fill the keg with sanitizer and blow it out with CO2? Thanks for all the great content through the years. Michael, you covered this on the first. I'll assume Edward's been tardy and has missed. And rather than ask him to rewind.
Edward, why weren't you there for the very first moment we started?
Yes, you've hurt our feelings, Edward. Michael, you want to repeat what you said? I mean, it's excellent advice.
Yeah. So, I mean, the way I think about it is if you're filling with CO2 and then venting, I mean, essentially you're just cutting that oxygen concentration half over and over again.
Yep.
And if you're doing that with 5 gallons, there's still probably going to be, I mean, I could do the calculations, but there's going to be more oxygen in that than, whereas I feel like filling with sanitizer actually does 3 things. You're sanitizing, you're purging, and then once you've purged, I pressurize, and then I have basically a leak down test. So I'm doing 3 tests. I'm doing 3 tasks in the same movement. And then what I do too is as I'm pushing out, if the keg is overflowing, as soon as I start to bring it down, like this tiny little volume, that then I start purging with the blow off valve, is you're minimizing your oxygen as best you can. So in my humble opinion, that's what I do. And that's what I would recommend.
Right. So at Airtick, I did calculate because the keg washer that we had, that a lot of breweries use, it had the ability to do, I think, up to 3 purge cycles with CO2. So to pressurize it to 60 PSI, then it relieves the pressure, then it pressurizes 60 PSI, relieves the pressure, pressurizes 60 PSI, relieves the pressure, uses a ton of CO2 and does not get the DO out, the oxygen out of the keg at all. I think my calculation for something like 3,000 parts per billion once the keg was purged 3 times to 60 PSI. So it doesn't work. I mean, the better way to purge a keg is with something like steam, where it, doesn't have so much oxygen in it. But like Michael's saying, yeah, fill it up with sanitizer, purge it. If you're going to not do Michael's method, what I would do is just hook up the CO2 to the beer out arm. So to the dip tube at the bottom, do low PSI, low flow. You can, if you have like a regulator so the other thing we had to do at Heretic was purge tanks after they were cleaned and open to the atmosphere. We would purge them with CO2, and the slower you go, I mean, I'm sure there's a bottom limit to it, but generally you go to, in a keg, I would go to like maybe a 1/4 liter a minute, or, 1/2 liter a minute, something like that. You don't want to go so slow that it just mixes with everything. You don't want to go so fast that you're turbulent at the bottom, but you can fill the keg very slowly from the bottom. And then you could calculate how many minutes it would take at a 1/2 liter a minute. Let's say it's let's use 20 liters for the size of a corny keg. So at half a liter a minute, it's going to take 40 minutes to slowly fill that thing up and purge out. You leave the blow off the pressure relief valve open and let it slowly purge that thing out. But it's not going to be perfect. So you're going to have some mix. So maybe you let it go for 120 minutes. So it's 3 times purged, which is what we did on the fermenters there. And that will get you to a pretty low DO. So that'll work if you're really concerned about it. I did as a home brewer, I always pressurize my purge and pressurize my kegs after I sanitize them. So I knew they're tight. And then I would actually open the lid. I put a little more CO2 in the bottom, and then I'd put the beer in. And like I said, there's still yeast in the beer, unless you're letting it sit for a long time. There's yeast in the beer. You put it in, the beer going in the bottom is giving off CO2 because there's CO2 saturated. It's saturated. A lot will come out as you're filling it up. So you fill it up. It's chasing away the oxygen. And once I sealed it up, I would purge the head space a few times. And I never had any problem with oxygen caused staling. So there you go. I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, no, I was just saying because you were throwing around flow rates. For me, I don't have a flow meter on my regulator at home. So what I did is I took a trash bag with a known volume and taped it. And actually, I hooked it up to the dip tube like you're saying. And I'm start the clock. And then how long does it take to fill the bag at, so it doesn't pressurize, but fills it. And so that would be standard temperature pressure, or at least pressure equalized. And then I could get a general flow rate. If you're looking for a little hack without buying having a special flow meter.
We call it rotometer.
There are more than one way to skin that. And Michael, for that suggestion there, you had 10 points.
Well, I thought more than that, but I can offer to you, Jamil, an opportunity for Michael to give you more points. Michael said before, he'd pressure is up and pop it, pressure it and pop it, and each time you're cutting it in half. So Michael was doing about 15 psi.
Right.
Jamil's doing 60 psi, so he's cutting it to 25% each time, right, Mike?
Mm-hmm.
But most of us as home brewers can't do 60 psi.
Right.
You're literally diluting the air in there every time you do it.
You can do 60 in a corny keg. They're good.
No, I don't. My regulator can't do it.
Oh, well, you can buy right. It will.
Yeah, I would hope in this conversation, like the concentration doesn't work out to effectively do that by just pressurizing, venting.
Exactly.
That's on a full vessel
point. I'm giving you a bonus 5 points for bringing that up.
Thanks.
Good job. All right. Let's see here.
I'm going to suck for the rest of the questions just so Michael wins this time.
Yay! Charity win.
Did we do a break?
No, because you're doing so good. We did one.
We did a break. Good. Somebody's keeping track. I keep forgetting to mark them down. All right. Let's see here. William, he writes, hi guys. I am plowing through all your episodes, cycling to and from work. Thanks for a great show. Just listened to the episode on mouthfeel, and I was intrigued when Jamil claims that I didn't claim, I stated that when brewing with lower efficiency, you should adjust only your base malt to get back to the right OG. Why is this? Example, bitter with pale ale and crystal at 70% efficiency using 8.5% crystal. Adjusting that down to 50% and only adjusting the pale ale means that the crystal goes down to 6.2. Will this not alter the sugar profile of the beer as well as the taste mouthfeel? I found that adjusting a couple of percent can make a noticeable difference for a beer like the one above. My efficiency varies a lot depending on the type of beer I'm brewing, between 50 and 75%. Okay, there's a lot to unpack here. So, yeah, the reason why you adjust the base malt for efficiency differences is because the efficiency of just rinsing the sugars or the flavor out of specialty malts that aren't getting converted, generally it's pretty much standard. The times I've seen conversions to commercial and homebrew fail is when, adjusting for efficiency, they adjust everything. And so all of a sudden you have way too much roasted malt, way too much crystal malt, to do a homebrew version of a commercial beer. It's way over the top. Or vice versa, you'll do it and the commercial brewery, they will ratchet everything down because they're getting a much higher efficiency than the home brewer does. They're in the 85, 90s, home brewer recipe maybe in 70. And they end up, it tastes nothing like the beer because all the specialty malts were not present. So yeah, it's a little counterintuitive, but that's the crux of it. But he's also saying his efficiency is varying between 50 and 75%. I mean, what the heck is that?
How's he sparging?
Yeah, I don't know why. I imagine if you were like, okay, I'm going to do 10, I've got, I'm going to do 10 gallons of barley wine, or, Belgian quad or something really, high gravity. And then I'm trying to do, on the next batch, I'm trying to do 5 gallons of, ordinary bitter, all in the same system. Yeah, I could see having some difficulties with efficiency there. You're going to get some efficiency difficulties. But if you're always doing, the same volume of batch, you should get pretty close to the same thing. You shouldn't see 50 to 75. A few points of difference, maybe.
I can't tell if Will is asking something theoretical or something he's witnessed, because if his beer efficiency, brewhouse efficiency is varying that much, let's focus on that before we focus on the recipes.
Agree. If you don't have, what is in at Davis, at UC Davis, Charlie Bamforth talks about repeatability and reproducibility.
Yeah,
and you got to nail those down.
Right.
And you got to be able to make the same beer twice, or at least your process produces the same kind of similar, like you're saying, there's going to be some variance based on style and gravity, but it shouldn't be varying. I mean, that's from 50 to 75. That's a 50% change.
Yeah, that's huge. And maybe he's kind of exaggerating a little bit.
Possibly.
I would wonder if because a lot of times people do not get the efficiency thing correct. They, if it's more humid out or warmer or colder or drier, you tend to evaporate more or less based on weather conditions. And that may be part of it. He's in the UK, UK in the summer versus UK in the winter could have enough difference. And so you're seeing more evaporation or not. And one of the things everybody should be doing is you should have a precise way of measuring your kettle volume. You should, and it could be as simple as a yardstick or, some stick that you've got measures on. And one of the things to remember when you're checking your volumes on this, when it's hot, when it's boiling, it's 4% larger than when it's cold or when it's, fermentation temperature. So you have to kind of take that into account.
Sounds like nothing, but that 4% makes a big difference.
Right. Especially, if you're trying to, but you should be ending at the same volume every time you brew. You should collect the same volume. You should finish at the same volume after boil.
Yep.
And once you've done that, then you can start looking at efficiency. If not, you can calculate, what your efficiency was, even if your volumes are different. But having your volumes consistent really helps with what you're doing.
So,
and that sounds. Sorry, Mike.
No, I have a Brew Chair Live question if you have time for it. But
let me.
Yeah.
So that sounds hypercritical, but it's not. I mean, don't take that as a reflection on your brewing. Just keep working on your process until you can nail those.
We're all here to make better beer.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
So this is actually a problem I've been having is I've been calculating my efficiencies after the lauter. So like pre-boil kettle, I'll take a gravity, use that against FTGB to get an efficiency. Then I boil,
right?
And then I take another gravity, and based on the volume change, I'm trying to keep them. I guess I'm not truly factoring for temperature, so there's probably some wiggle in there. But I mean, actually, I am, because I was actually thinking about it, because I take the sample, then I cool it down so I can get a gravity. So they're always.
Are you measuring bricks or gravity?
I use SG usually.
Okay, so SG is really close to linear. Bricks is not linear. So,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're temperature correcting, and I'll tell you, because I've been tweaking my spreadsheet for 10 years now. I used to do it on bricks. Bricks is just not linear. 5 gallons at 10 bricks down to 2.5 gallons is not equal 20 bricks. But 5 gallons stupid numbers, 5 gallons at 1040 boiled down to 2.5 gallons should be really close to 1080.
So you're saying, do you go to points then to do the? Because I'm just trying to the ratio of the beginning
to 10. Yeah, it is. The 5 times 40 equals the 2.5 times 80. And on my anvil, for over a year straight, I am exactly 2 points difference pre versus post in that multiplication. So if I'm dead on OG, I know I'm going to be 2 points low FG. Now that's not as linear as 10 and 5 or 5 and 2.5. It's 7.13 down to 6.5. And it's probably a measurement error that I'm doing. But points, get rid of that 1, times it by 1,000. Points are so damn linear, where bricks aren't. But the brewers love bricks. Jamil, you love bricks?
Plato, but specific gravity is fine too. It's just, at least in the US, it's more common to use Plato. I think in the UK, they use specific gravity all the time. Well, and Michael, I think you got a great point about, you can check your efficiency right before the boil. It gets a little thrown off if you're one of those people that hits your burner the moment you get like a half inch in your kettle, and you start, you're boiling and you're heating as you fill. If you don't heat it up, then you could you could do a correction, I guess, on it for temperature. But
yeah, that's been my biggest bugaboo in the last probably 5 or 6 brews. I've started to notice that my mash efficiencies are bang. I can hit that number. I mean, I can predict it almost down to the percent. But then from kettle full to flame out, and then actually even when I go to pitch, I'm kind of missing there, and there's some fluff in there I'm working out. Versus, I mean, I'm even thinking, because I make starters and I haven't really done the calculations to account for an extra 1.5 liters of whatever the OG. I don't even take gravity readings of my starters, so there's a little unknowns there too. Mm-hmm. So that was my Brew Strong life question.
So ladies and gentlemen,
if you email it to
I will.
BrewNetwork.com. We'll get
it on the Facebook,
and within 5 years we'll get to it. It's not a problem. All right, let's do another quick break, and when we come back, more of your questions right after this.
Learning to brew has never been so disgusting. This is Brew Strong.
All right, we're back. We're answering your questions live. If you're listening live in the chat room, go in there and hammer out a question. We're happy to cover it for you. If not, you can also email them to brewstrong@thebrewingnetwork.com, and we will get to them quite quickly now, because we're prioritizing the ones that just come in. So don't worry. But we will get to all the ones that have been sent in. Nathaniel, he says, greetings, ye stewards of stalwart suds. A couple of questions for you. What effect might CO2 have on flavor extraction when dry hopping? I have a beer already kegged and carbonated that now seems to me like it would taste even better with a healthy dose of nugget hops. If I were to degas the keg, open it up, and toss a handful of hops in there now, would the CO2 that's in solution pose any problems to extracting the flavor from these hops? Also, I tend to make, let's see. All right, he's got two questions here. All right, let's deal with the CO2 in solution pose any problems to extracting the flavor from these hops.
Yeah, I was slightly distracted and I missed the question, so I'll catch you up while Michael gives some
Go
input.
ahead, Michael.
So the real thing it comes down to is bubble size, and CO2 will extract at a higher efficiency of inorganic or of organic compounds that are nonpolar at a smaller bubble size, way more. So like when I dry hop, I'll hook up the bottom drain and there's no stone or anything. So it's just giant bubbles. I am not worried about extraction at all because these bubbles are huge. Their surface area to volume ratios are huge, are not conducive to mass transfer. And then what I would say is, as long as you don't flash your beer, like as in open that lid and let the pressure change, you're not going to get a huge amount of foam or CO2 emission. You would be able to add that, and then CO2 in solution doesn't extract anything because it's not leaving. So you'd be fine.
I think, one of the issues could be, I think he's talking about relieving the pressure on the top of the keg, opening the lid and throwing his hops in. You could do that, get your keg as cold as possible before you do it, and then get the lid back on as quickly as possible because you can cause the hops are going to act like nucleation sites and the CO2 is coming out very quickly. So one thing very common in a lot of breweries is they'll go to dry hop a keg that's, got a fair amount of carbonation in it just from fermentation. They'll throw the hops in and then beer will come shooting out, the dry hop poured out the top. And
it's like you speak from experience.
We'll coat the ceiling and you have to throw away insulation.
It's like the Mentos in a Coke.
Yes, Mentos in a Coke. Very good example.
So it's interesting though.
When they do the CO2 extraction of hops, they use liquid form CO2, don't they?
Yeah, it's cryogenic. It's liquid form. It's really, really cold. Right. Michael, is that like sub 260 to get CO2 liquid? What is that temperature?
Well, see, the problem with CO2 is it doesn't really end up in liquid form unless you pressurize it. It actually will deposit as dry ice. Right. So you have to actually do it under pressure if you want liquid. Yeah. So
that's a curve.
High pressure, yeah. And then you can get it to actually go from being super critical to, or, above the is that condensation point? Triple point.
All right. Then he asks, also, I tend to make my yeast starters the night before I brew. Thus, I typically pitch them after about 18 to 24 hours. I leave the starter on the stir plate this entire time. Do you recommend this or is it unnecessary? If I was to not pitch that starter until, let's say, 48 hours, would it be detrimental to the yeast to leave it on the stir plate that entire time? Thanks in advance for answering my questions, and thanks for all the years of service you've done to the homebrewing community. If you leave it on the starter so technically, depending on the stir bar, it's a completely flat stir bar. There's the ones with the rings in the middle, kind of keep it up off the bottom. But the flat stir bar across the bottom could pop some yeast cells. That
really?
Yeah. Generally, the liquid, it floats on the liquid, but there could be some damage to the yeast cells. I don't really worry about it, but the reason I wouldn't go 48 hours with a stir plate and most yeasts, most volumes of starters that you're going to do, within 18 to 20 some odd hours, the growth of yeast is completely done. There's no more growth that's going to happen at that point. I would turn it off just from that, and I would put it in the fridge and let it settle out. And then when time to brew comes, I would decant the spent starter wort, so you're not adding that to your beer. And then I'd leave a little bit in there so I could swish it around, and then I would pitch just the yeast. And I think that is probably the ideal way to do it versus just leaving it sitting there warm for 48 hours.
So
it's gonna end up using up some of its energy reserves sitting there warm for 48 hours versus you chill it. It tends to build its glycogen reserves, etc.
Also, why pitch the spent wort, the quote unquote beer that smells like other beer that we don't buy and drink typically?
Exactly.
I was going to say, based on my readings in this book called How to Brew, John talks a lot about either pitching at high Kreuzen, the starter, when it's really going, or 12 to 18 hours, somewhere in there, turning off the stir plate, because that way you're kind of cutting off the oxygen, and then the yeast will go to sleep. Like they'll keep their trihalose and nutrient reserves and go to sleep. And that way you're not pitching tired. He said, I remember in the How to Brew, is if you leave the stir plate running the whole time, and at least in How to Brew, he talks about you'd be pitching the yeast tired. They won't have any reserve.
I mean, that might be kind of based on just conversations on the show or something, but the thing is, oxygen's no issue to the yeast. The yeast will use as much oxygen as they can get generally. The thing is, growth is done generally before all the sugars are utilized. You don't fully utilize all the sugars in growth, but so there's a point that the yeast manufacturers know where when you've reached a certain point, they actually crash chill their yeast, and it causes the yeast to build their glycogen reserves. So it's good for storage, good for use later on. This is one of the reasons that Y-Labs can make yeast and send it to you, several weeks later, and it's in peak condition, is because they've used that. If you let them go further until like the very end of things, until you don't see any action going or whatever, and you think it's all completely done, you're not going to get the same level of glycogen reserve in there. And
this is why other packages that aren't necessarily smack packs might swell when warmed.
Right.
Because they've artificially halted the yeast to keep, as Michael was talking about, or the glycogen reserves.
Right. And
very interesting.
So I'm trying to think about what you said there, Michael.
Sorry.
But I almost designed my process straight out of How to Brew, where it was that 12 to 16 hour period of stirring, shut it down, let it settle, goes in the fridge. By 24 to 48 or 24 to 36, no longer than 48. And I've had pretty awesome results. That's, I'm kind of leaning on How to Brew. So.
Yeah, that's generally what the process is. Yeah. I would not leave a starter on a stir plate for a long period of time. 48 hours is probably too much. Generally I would start it one day. The next day I would pull it off. I would put it in the fridge, chill it, pour off the spent wort, and then use the yeast then.
Could I just one last experience thing.
Uh-huh.
So this fridge I keep at 31 for conditioning. I don't recommend putting a starter in that kind of fridge because I felt like I kind of stunned them by going below freezing. So
Yeah, well, so
that was kind of,
there's
I felt like I ended up almost with a stuck fermentation because I don't know if I can attribute it exclusively to that.
well, there's a couple of things, and I'm not sure how the yeast manufacturers are chilling their yeast cultures down, but if you drop the temperature too rapidly, you will cause the yeast to express heat shock proteins, and the heat shock, but you get a heat shock from chilling as you do heating. So too rapidly a chilling could cause them to, and generally it shouldn't be that much of a problem, but what happens is it utilizes its resources in creating these proteins that it wouldn't normally if you didn't do that. So I always tried to chill it down a little slower than that. I wouldn't put it into like a freezing situation. Right. Essentially, I would put it into just start chilling it down. And then what I preferred to do was kind of grow my yeast like a week in advance. And then the day of brewing, I would take sterile wort and I would add that to the yeast and get them active and fully active, and then pitch that at high Croissant.
You smack pack them.
Essentially, yeah. And with the yeast of high Croissant, and you've grown up a bunch of healthy yeast, and you haven't tired out the yeast by leaving them in too long, and then you add the wort, the starter wort, you get pretty much the best results that you're going to get. Let's see here. Okay.
Time for a break.
Let's see here.
I think Travis is like pseudo the show producer. He's always on top of the breaks. He's on top of the questions. He's on it.
He's our new Bevo.
Or Jamil's lackey, whatever he calls it,
Travo.
Yeah, we got
no need for Travo.
Not quite as good looking as Bevo, but he's in.
Oh my God. I'm sure you just hurt her feelings.
Can I be watch this shit? Can I be Porno Steve?
Porno Steve. You do kind of look like Porno Steve. Let's see here. All right. Alexi asks, hello, couple of questions for Jamil. One, he speaks about brewing constantly to get better. Is he speaking about brewing full 5 to 10 gallon batches, or as long as your process is the same, can you do smaller brews, 2 to 3 gallons? I mean, yes and no. I think there's a lot of aspects of brewing that you could get familiar with and perfect doing smaller batches. Sure. I don't think it's wasted, but part of, repetitive brewing is getting to know your equipment and your measurements and all that stuff, and to get repeatability. And repeatability is a great thing in brewing. And because once you're able to repeat your process over and over and over, then that's your opportunity to start changing recipes. Once you've mastered the actual physical aspect of brewing. So you could do that, absolutely. But eventually you need to, be repetitive on the equipment and the scale that you're doing it. Yeah.
I would also just say too, as somebody who started out doing 1 gallon batches, your instruments to be able to measure ingredients and yeast pitches and hop additions at those smaller volumes become a little more tricky. And the bigger you go, or even 5 gallon is kind of the reason it's the norm, is because that's where I think ingredients and your process becomes more repeatable, because that decimal point has been moved.
Mm-hmm.
And having a scale with an error of 0.1 grams at 5 gallons is nothing. Who cares?
Yeah.
And versus if you're doing 1 gallon, that mistake's been multiplied 5 times.
Yep.
So
That's a good point.
Well, how was it for you scaling from your 1 gallon to your 5 gallon or your 10 gallon, whatever you're on now? I mean, because I think the question is, sure, you can learn, and obviously you have brewing on 1 gallon, but you're going to scale sooner or later. So every one of your recipes is going to change in some degree, not just by a multiple of 5.
yeah, I mean, for me, I was on a Pico brew, which I pretty much nailed down. The efficiency was, I mean, not good. And so my recipes kind of got flipped upside down once I got to I do 10 gallons at a time now. But at least in terms of grasping the science and understanding the concepts and getting kind of an introductory where you're not making huge investments. I mean, maybe if it's something you can kind of see if you want to do. But I would say if you're trying to take that step from making beer to making great beer, award-winning beer, the volumes that are typically talked about at homebrew scale I think there's a reason for that. And there's a reason that the yeast packs are all sized for 5 gallons. And it becomes more controllable at the instruments that we typically use, I guess. And that's again, these are all my experiences and my opinions and my readings. So
I feel like the word you were looking for was beer, making beer to making beer.
we put the testicles in technical, or is it technical and testicle? I don't know. One of those.
That was always my favorite. That was always my favorite read right there.
I thought you liked we're like the Lance Armstrong of brewing, except for that
right.
nut thing.
All right. So second question is the online Siebel course respected in the brewing field? I'm looking at getting some experience to perhaps move into the field. Do I need to just suck it up and go to either UC Davis or the on-site Siebel course? He has a Bachelor of Science in Biology. Yeah, I don't think it matters. I think much higher of UC Davis than Siebel, but Siebel's good too. American Brewing School or American Brewing, what's it called? Out on the East Coast. Yeah, I actually hired somebody from there. So I think it's more important that you show that you've studied and you put the extra effort into learning about brewing before you go in the field. That shows up on the resume. It doesn't matter which one it is. That shows up. Personally, I think Davis is better, but I may be partial to it. But any of them is good. Whatever you can afford, whatever is works best for you. Go ahead and do it, and it'll help you. All right, let's take a quick break, and then we'll hit the last question in the chat, and then we're done. All right, we'll be back right after this.
Back to the beer guys that make other beer guys look like wine guys. Brew strong.
All right, we're back. Answering your questions live, and Jesus has a question.
It's a very easy one. It's a yes or no question. You guys have any experience with Philly sours or sour VCA acidification during fermentation? So it's kind of like yes or no, and I'm partial. I've had adjacent experience, but not direct experience. Jamil, yes or no?
Yeah, it's so I haven't heard of Philly sours. I mean,
So
is
Philly sour?
every location now doing their own version of sours?
No, it's a different yeast. Philly sour I heard of before the sour VCA, but they're both I think they're both SAC that reduce lactate during fermentation.
What is it? How does that make it a Philly sour?
If you buy the package from I think it's Lalamont, it's called Philly sour.
Oh, really?
I didn't reach out to them and ask them why it's called Philly sour, but sour VCA and Philly sour are two different manufacturers. Similar.
Did somebody in Philly throw their underwear in the fermenter and
it might have been a pretty horse
and
comes with peppers and onions.
What?
Did peppers and onions go catch a Phillies game?
There you go.
It might have been a pretty horse, or a sour horse. I don't know, because that's also known as a filly. Philly. I don't know.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Is it a horse?
Right. The yeast that do the souring, they're actually pretty good. I've tasted a number of beers that have been made with that method, and they're good. They're generally clean. I think the reason that some people don't go that route is that they don't quite get the acidification that they want. So some people want to go a little further. So I was just talking to a friend of mine who won gold medal at GABF with his sour beer, and that was using the kettle souring method that we had used at Heretic, which is you get your mash, you boil for 15 minutes, and then you cool it down. And then once you're down to about 100, 104 degrees Fahrenheit, you add plantarum. I did this at Fuller's in England. We used plantarum and did the same thing. It turns out great. It's clean, and so that works out well. And then you heat it up again, kill the bacteria, and then you pitch your whatever yeast you want to ferment with, and that works great. And you have a much better control over the pH. You can get it down a little bit lower. Whereas this friend of mine, he was telling me that he tried those yeasts and he was getting he wasn't quite able to get as low as he wanted using those yeasts. So I think you have less control over it if you use these souring yeasts versus using a bacteria that will take it down even lower, and then you just cut it off with heat when you're done. You can't do that in the fermenter. So that's kind of the drawback on that, Jesus, is not having the control you want. I think that the flavor quality is there, and now more brewers are going to do it because it's just cheaper and easier. And that's why like barrel aged sours are dying, because nobody wants to put in the effort and the cost into doing it, because nobody will pay more for them these days, because the average consumer just doesn't know about it.
In all fairness, a lot of those were not very good. Some of those were excellent. Some of them needed to go away.
That's a good point. Well, a lot of the sour beers that people are making can be pretty horrible.
Yes.
There's great ones, but there's also bad ones.
But Berliner / sour VCA / Philly sour, they're not exactly the same, but that's one style versus true sours. Where if you don't like Cantillon, you probably don't like true sours.
True.
To your point. And not everybody can pull that off. It's a whole lot easier to pull off, in my opinion, a Berliner style or a Ghost style than it is a 9 months aging in a barrel. Hope you get something out drinkable.
Right.
Yeah. But I've had some that I know were brewed with sour VCA, and they're not straight Berliners, which even if Berliner's not a straight Berliner, you add some fruit stuff after, a little bit of the, what do you call it? There's the green stuff and the red stuff.
The Schuss.
Yes. Yes. And they look at you very funny in Berlin if you say, I want one straight.
Right.
They look at you sideways. But I think if you're going for a fruited Berliner style sour, those products can make you a decent one for sure. But you have to put in the work to make it go to where you want. And as you said, it may not end up at the pH you want, whether that's too high or too low. Too high, throw some lactic in, you're already not following the process. Who cares? Too low, I don't know. Good luck.
Yeah, I think if you're home brewing and want to do it, I think it's a great way to go. If it doesn't turn out sour enough, you could always just spike it with a little bit of lactic acid.
Yeah,
I think that's fine. Commercially, I don't know.
So I guess just for me, I can't really speak to sours, so that's why I've been uniquely quiet right now. I really haven't taken a stab at sour. I mean, I look at it as a whole nother realm. Like you guys are talking about the different ways to achieve sourness, the control of pH, even as a home brewer, there's considerations about sanitation and being able to maintain, like, I know that 5 gallons can become sour only. At least that's what the rumor is. And so
I would recommend trying the sour VCA. If you're just starting in sours, brewing sours, I would try the sour VCA. I think that's a good move. And then once you've done that, if you like, oh, I want more sour or less sour or something like that, then try doing the plantarum thing. I think it's a better way. And then, God forbid, maybe you get into, the various bacterias and wild yeasts and stuff and do it a barrel aged sour over a couple of years, and that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. So I think I'm right on this, Jamil. One is natural, one's created. And I think the Philly might be one they found, and the sour VCA might be one they made.
There you go. All right.
And I don't care either way. I think I've gotten past that hump for making good beer. But from memory, and sooner or later we'll have 1,000 listeners that'll say that Travis guy, he's totally freaking off on that. Anyway.
Well, you and me both.
I'm sure. All of us are going to be. What a bunch of
idiots. Listenership's just going to go in the tank. It's just, it's just so, poor Justin. He's going to have to get an actual job. All right. Thanks everybody for listening. We really appreciate you guys tuning in, especially live, and asking your questions. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Edward. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Scott. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Travis. Thank you, Michael. Another great show. Make sure, if you appreciate this, reach out to John Blickman at Blickman Engineering. You can send him an email, feedback@blickmanengineering.com. It actually goes directly to John Blickman. There's not some lackey checking these. It's John Blickman that reads them, and he does appreciate it. You can tell him how much you appreciate it. He's a great guy, and if you're at the conference in San Diego this year, go up to him, just say, hey, thank you. He's just a lovely person to talk with and hang out with. So hopefully we'll see you there. Until then, everybody, brew strong.
Brew strong.
Brew strong.